Around 30 miles west of Asheville, North Carolina, high up in the Smokey Mountains, sits a former theme park plagued with multiple closures and debt. At one time back in the 60s, this property was a thriving regional park with all the charm you might expect from its old western theme and unique location. But once the golden decades passed by, an era of tedious trouble emerged. What's up guys, my name is Jake, and in this 75th episode of Abandoned, we'll discover how this beloved local theme park started and where it ultimately ended up 60 years later. This is Ghost Town Village, or formerly known as Ghost Town in the Sky. This video is sponsored by Kamikoto, high-quality Japanese steel knives. You can get an extra $50 off when going to kamikoto.com/bright50 and using my special code BRIGHT50 at checkout. It started with a man named R.B. Coburn, who was a North Carolina native and saw a great opportunity in bringing themed entertainment to his home state. After being inspired by the many ghost towns in Western America, as well as the general fascination the country had with the Old West, Coburn decided to bring that to North Carolina. He purchased Buck Mountain in the town of Maggie Valley and essentially cut the top off of it so it could be built upon. With over $1 million being spent in 1960, Coburn oversaw the creation of his vision, with a replica old western town and around 40 buildings to occupy the park. At an elevation of over 4,000 feet or 1,200 meters, the amusement park climbed into the sky, and park guests would have an interesting way to ascend up the mountain. America's steepest double incline railway was established, transporting those people up the steep grade and delivering them to the unique hilltop ghost town. And it was a big hit, as in June of 1961, the park opened with crowds from all over coming to visit this unique theme park. The aptly named Ghost Town in the Sky was right in line with the era, as pop culture was obsessed with the Old West. On an hourly basis each day, choreographed gunfights would break out on the streets, giving everyone a chance to live the action. Soon, a chairlift was added in 1962, giving another way for guests to reach the top, and over the decade or so, the park became one of North Carolina's most popular tourist attractions, standing as a very strong regional theme park. Though in size, the park was actually pretty small. 3 separate lands made up the mountaintop park, all on different levels of elevation. There was the Indian Village, Mountain Town, and Mining Town, all immersive adventures where guests could go to live out their fantasy of being in that era. By the early 70s, Ghost Town in the Sky was attracting over 400,000 people a year. Now, R.B. Coburn didn't stop here, as he opened another 2 parks with similar themes, one in North Carolina and the other in Florida. With all of these open and operating rather smoothly, his attention actually turned to other ventures, so he ended up selling Ghost Town through what is known as a stock swap. It's basically where you take one asset, in this case being the theme park, for an equity stake, oftentimes in the company to which you are trading your asset to. Through the 80s, the park somewhat declined in visitors. While it did expand somewhat over this time, the new owners left the core of the park basically the same, and it continued to stay that way for quite some time, featuring no thrilling attractions. In a bizarre turn of events, Coburn actually purchased the theme park back in 1986. He realized this downturn though, and added the most significant attraction to the park yet. In 1988, the Red Devil opened, a steel roller coaster featuring one inversion and around 80% of the track cantilevered over the side of the mountain. Through the 90s, a few more attractions opened up, but the original attendance numbers of the 70s just weren't being captured. This caused regular park maintenance to slump, and that trickled down into the rides often breaking down. The word of mouth on this spread, and Ghost Town in the Sky was no longer the fun, adventurous park it had opened at. To guests, it was now feeling more like a tired old park with nothing to do and not worth your money. By the conclusion of the 2002 season, the park was bleeding money, and Coburn decided not to reopen it for 2003. Instead, the park sat shuttered and abandoned through the next few years, until 2006, when a new company had purchased the park. Coburn's 30-year run of creating and running the park had finally come to an end, and a new holding company set up as Ghost Town Partners LLC planned to reopen the park. They indeed did so in May of 2007, with several $1 million being spent on bringing the park back up to speed. Omitted from these renovations, though, were the big attractions, like the incline railway, the train, and the roller coaster. Despite this, there was general excitement about this reopening. However, the momentum of that wouldn't carry through into the next year, as in 2008, the housing crisis put a significant dent in tourism, and for the park owners, many of their future plans had to be shelved. Money was still being invested into the park and the rides, with the Red Devil, now renamed the Cliffhanger, reopening for just a few days before it had to be shut down once again due to a failed safety inspection. The coaster was designed by a lesser-known company and built at a pretty low budget, so it's no wonder why the ride was riddled with issues and had to be closed within months, even days of reopening after repairs. With the property slipping into disrepair and attendance not high enough to offset those costs, the park rather abruptly filed for bankruptcy protection, owing more than $2.5 million to their creditors. By the conclusion of the 2009 season, Ghost Town in the Sky was closed once again with an uncertain future. After a failed attempt from a third party to try and purchase the site, the amusement park continued to sit abandoned atop the mountain. While still closed in February 2010, a retaining wall meant to keep Earth in place on the mountain had failed, causing a rather large mudslide down the mountain. This affected nearly 40 nearby residents and completely buried a section of the service road to the park. Those residents actually sued the park, claiming the owners had failed to upkeep the retaining wall and knew that it might collapse. By the end of that year, Ghost Town was deep underwater, now with over $10 million in debt, and had no plans to reopen the park. Ultimately, the property was foreclosed upon and planned to be sold at auction to the highest bidder. In 2012, Alaska Presley, a local charismatic businesswoman who had been involved with the early beginnings of the park, actually won that auction with her bid of $2.5 million. She wanted to reopen the park as it was, and fast. The plan was to make the necessary renovations and get things moving. First, with the reopening of the gift shop at the base of the mountain in June 2012. That summer also saw a somewhat partial reopening of the park. Meanwhile, cleanup work on the access road and critical ride repairs were being made. The same would be the case for the following year as well, with the added liabilities of water main issues, which likely cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to repair. Modern-day regulations and codes which hadn't been kept up with by the original owners were starting to build up, now with a very long to-do list that the park needed to get done. Despite all of this, Presley was ready to expand with what she called Resurrection Mountain, a brand new land to add to the park, which would broadly be themed to something that has to do with Christianity. It would be topped off with a large cross that would be seen for miles and likely would become the park's new symbol. Still, progress was slow, and this land had many setbacks. The same could be said for their seasonal openings, as in 2014 and 2015, the opening dates were delayed due to failed inspections for park services and rides, mainly with a chairlift to get there. Clearly things weren't going all that well for Alaska, and by the conclusion of the 2015 season, the park announced a major renovation and a new name. Ghost Town Village would scrap many of its existing rides, citing them as too expensive to repair, and then re-theme the old western town to an Appalachian village. Apparently the Holy Land style section of the park was also still on the table, while also promising that they would continue their classic shootout shows. The concept was ultimately doomed, and a complete failed start, as just a few months later, in June 2016, the park went up for sale as Presley gave up on the property. Once again, the site had several potential buyers come in and fall through, along with several reopening promises that were just never met. Eventually, the park did find a buyer who acquired all 250 acres of land that were up for sale for $5 million. Now, they had an ambitious plan, promising to invest $200 million over the next decade into the park to bring it up to a much larger facility. In those plans are a brand new shopping district, which may also contain apartments, a brand new hotel, and an updated version of the old structures with modernized infrastructure to go along with it. The developers hired a California-based theme park architecture group called Storyland Studios to come up with some of these new designs. But to throw a wrench in this even further, in August 2022, Alaska Presley had passed away at the age of 98. While she did in fact sell her land, prior to her death, she had agreements with this new company pertaining to the future development. She also had money invested into it, and this just made everything complicated and very confusing. That brings us to now, as there hasn't been any meaningful developments at the park. Ghost Town made a lot of sense when it opened in the early 60s. It's located in a beautiful area and on a unique parcel of land. There's a lot of character to this place, and many of those who got a chance to visit have fond, nostalgic memories of it. But as the world changed and American culture grew tired of the Old West, attendance just dropped. Despite the addition of a few attractions, it was all done very cheap while the rest of the park remained stagnant. At the same time, it was always going to be a small regional amusement park. I mean, there are literal land constraints on how much they could actually build, so really only a local market would be visiting here. So as the word of mouth spoke poorly of the worsening conditions at the park, it made sense why Ghost Town dropped in popularity. Add in a seasonal operating schedule and cheap rides that became expensive to repair, and the fate was sealed for this park. It is surprising though how many times it had seen resurgence. After sitting abandoned for years at a time, then suddenly opening back up for guests. It truly is insane. But after 2015, and despite all the well intentions of a passionate businesswoman, the writing was on the wall. Since that date, the park is sat abandoned with little work to keep up with the deterioration. Given all of that context, it's hard not to be a little cynical of this new $200 million development and if it actually goes forward. Whatever the future may hold though, this park will always live on as a classic American amusement park. One that actually became what it was themed after, a literal ghost town in the sky. This video has been sponsored by Kamikoto, fantastic Japanese steel knives. Now, I've gotten a little bit into cooking over the past 2 years or so, and when you spend a lot of time preparing food, usually you want the best tools for the job. Kamikoto knives are just that. With a high quality feel and experience all the way down to the hefty ashwood box they come in, these knives have made cooking that much better of an experience. Made with high quality Japanese steel and crafted with traditional techniques. With a single beveled edge, they come extremely sharp out of the box and glide through pretty much everything I threw at them. After using them for a few days, I totally understand why they're being used by Michelin star chefs, and on top of all of that, each knife comes with a lifetime guarantee. Kamikoto has also made it their goal to provide exceptional customer service as well, which I really commend. If you're looking for an elevated kitchen experience or the perfect Thanksgiving gift, well, Kamikoto is offering my viewers $50 USD off of any purchase when you use the discount code BRIGHT50. A link will also be in the description below. Anyway guys, my name is Jake, and thank you very much for watching.